Can a note suggest if Eddie and Eunice are okay with it, that we do record this part for people who are currently not present?
Yep, okay, Mike has started the recording in conception. Perfect. Just before we let you know, we will let them, I don't know, Eddie, how do you want to do it? Like ask questions in the middle of the slides or at the end of the entire presentation? Like just let the people know.
I think just because I'm so bad at using Microsoft Teams, maybe we can save it to the end because maybe if it was Zoom, I could be a little more savvy, but this one always gets me.
Yeah, no worries. People just raise their hands in using the raise hand functionality if you have a question, and we'll come to you in the end. Eddie and Aaron, go ahead.
Sweet. All right, maybe a quick little intro. So Erin was helping us. She's one of our full-time staff. She was helping us coordinate this, but we have Eunice on the call, who's our president. So hello, everyone. My name is Eddie. My pronouns are he, him. I am the executive director at the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance, or USA. And I'll let Eunice introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eunice. I'm the Vice President of External Affairs at the University Students' Council at Western, and then President over at USA, and my pronouns are she, her. It's nice to see you all this morning.
Yes, and maybe before we get into it, yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for letting us quickly just come here and speak. The purpose of this is to hopefully go to all of our member associations, give them a little bit of a presentation about what USA is, so you have an idea of what the organization is, all the work that Steph and the rest of the exec have done with regards to USA this year, but also for you to ask questions at the end, so we can have a little bit of that dialogue. I'll also just say thank you for making time on a Sunday morning. I think the work that you do as student leaders is often underappreciated, but not many people would wake up at 10 to be on a presentation on a Sunday. So congrats. And thank you, Cannon, for all of that you do. Okay, we'll get started with Eunice.
Awesome. So I'll start with a brief little overview of what USA is, or the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance. As some of you may know, we are an organization comprised of 8 member student associations in Ontario, and we do our provincial advocacy, or a lot of our provincial advocacy, in coalition with each other. So we have Western USC, Laurentian, Queen's AMS, McMaster, Brock, Waterloo, Laurier, Trent, and then we have 2 observer schools currently. So we have the University of Ottawa Student Union, and then the newly added Ontario Tech Students Union. So each association has representatives on USA's board of directors, or our steering committee. So we kind of steer the direction of the organization and give home office direction on various advocacy initiatives that we want to take on. So the board is entirely made up of student leaders, made up of people like myself, and then also Steph, who does an amazing job on our steering committee, and we basically lead the organization.
Sweet. So as you said, it's a student-driven collaboration of student governments that helps develop public policy solutions and advocates to the provincial government. And the 4 pillars that USA really tries to incorporate into everything that we do is standing for the affordability, accessibility, high quality, and accountability of post-secondary education in Ontario. And maybe I'll also take this opportunity to say that USA has been around for a decent amount of time. So oftentimes when the government is looking for consultation or looking for someone to provide that student perspective from a university student perspective and undergrads, they'll contact USA. So we're well respected in the space, especially through all of the different ways that we interact with government through lobby meetings, but also through consultations and engaging in some of their processes like the budget consultations, which we can chat about a little bit as well.
So next I'll go over some of the main activities that we do within a given year. So the first is conducting research on a number of issues. And so we have research and policy analysts that help with a lot of this. And then we use this research and also consultation with all of our member schools to develop informed and substantive policy papers. And so those policy papers go to our General Assembly, which is comprised of student leaders from all of our campuses, and it's edited and ratified and passed by these student leaders. And then we use these policies to lobby the government to enact changes. So we'll go over our policy library briefly later on in the slideshow, but we have an extensive policy library and we pull our recommendations from these policies. And then the last is representing the student perspective throughout the sector. So whether that's through campaigns or just through different lobby meetings that we attend, we make sure that we're really representing that student voice. And it's a little bit easier because we are all students or recent graduates, so we're able to kind of use our perspective in that realm of things.
So it is now later on. This is the slide that Eunice was talking about. So this is our policy library. It's comprised of around 21 or 22 policies. So one thing that I'll highlight is that everything that USA talks about or recommends to government is strictly drawn from our policy libraries. So all of the recommendations that we ask for, we're not making them up on the fly. We have policy to draw from. So for example, myself as a full-time staff support, I know that I myself am not a student anymore, but I can comfortably pull from our policy library and say like, well, when the students finished up their student health and wellness paper, these are the recommendations that they really wanted to highlight when it came to menstrual health and the importance of some of those like healthcare products or mental health, like those types of things I can pull from the library because I know that that's what has been ratified at the General Assembly. I'll also take this opportunity to say that we have 2 research and policy analysts that help support the students in writing them. And then we also have a communications and operations coordinator who helps with conferences and everything communications and kind of like the branding and marketing of USA with all our campaigns. So there's 4 full-time staff members, but as Eunice said, everything else is run by the board, who's completely comprised of students. Some other activities that USA engages in is trying to stay connected with the broader community, writing things like op-eds, maintaining a blog, which if you are interested in participating, definitely contact Steph because we do often feature students at large in these blogs as well, if they're interested, engaging in social media, doing campaigns, and yeah, prior to the pandemic, we had a lot of in-person conferences, but all of our conferences have been transitioned to online. But many of the people on this meeting or in this meeting have actually attended many of our conferences as well. So.
Awesome. So here's a little structure or like graphic that we like to use to explain the structure of USA. So I'll start from the bottom and kind of go up. So we have home office, which we mentioned previously, which is our full-time staff. And they take direction from our executive team. And our executive team is comprised of myself as president, Steph as vice president finance, and then we have a vice president HR. And then the executive takes direction from steering committee, which is our larger board of directors with representatives from each of our member schools. Steering committee takes direction from General Assembly. So as I mentioned before, we have representatives from each of our schools that come to General Assembly and basically assess and pass these policy papers. And the General Assembly takes direction from the larger student body at each of our respective campuses. So the main kind of thing to emphasize here is it really is a student-run organization with students being prioritized through kind of every step that we take in our advocacy. So here's a little screenshot of one of our General Assemblies. Ben and Steph, and I believe a bunch of other people here have attended previous General Assemblies. So this is what they've been looking like online and what the March General Assembly will also look like online. And then here is our steering committee for this year. And I'll give Steph a quick shout out and assure you all that you are all in great hands. And Steph does a really amazing job of representing Waterloo within our board of directors and within USA. So big shout out to Steph, our VP Finance.
Sweet. So now this is the part of the kind of conversation that we really like to highlight, especially when we go to every single campus, and that's the student fees that are helping contribute and make up USA. So at USA, we charge all the member associations a $3.24 fee per full-time equivalent. And this is just a one-time charge throughout the year. So it's not like per semester, so it's not actually $6, it's just $3.24. This is the fee that we charge for the 2021-2022 year, so the current academic year. And then the board of directors actually votes on what they want the fee to look like in the next year. So in previous years, usually there might be a slight adjustment for inflation, so that's usually a couple of cents. But this year, I think based off of the financials of USA and also the understanding that students are really struggling and there isn't a dire need to increase student fees right now, like the board has actually voted on keeping it the same for this year. Also, inflation's a little bit wild right now, so like a 5% increase, because that's what inflation is right now, is actually pretty sizable. So I think the board of directors has decided to stick with this for next year as well. So this will be the USIP for next year as well. But we always want to be as transparent as possible when it comes to everyone understanding that USA is still run and financed through student fees as well, even if it's just $3.
So here are some of the different opportunities that each of our member schools kind of get as being a part of USA. So the first is the ability to set USA's priorities and goals. And we do this early on in the summer when we've all settled into our roles. We come together and set our priorities for the year and what our advocacy goals will be, and we'll go over those later on. Next is leadership in the province. As Eddie mentioned, USA is pretty well recognized and respected within the space of provincial advocacy. And so people come to us a lot of the times to kind of get our perspective or consult with us. So we're able to have that leadership there. The next is access to decision makers. So as I mentioned, just access to whether it's a minister or different organizations that we work with, like HECO, for example. And then also resources and assistance and best practices sharing. So we have some really good support with the full-time staff that are able to support us, whether through research and that area. And then we're also able to discuss with each other as, vice presidents within our own roles and kind of hear what's going on in our campuses and get advice on various areas that we're working on. And thanks, Steph, for putting that in the chat. And then the last is opportunities for students. So there's opportunities for students to write blogs, articles. We also have summer interns over the summer who are able to really have a great professional development opportunity and work with USA throughout the summer. So yeah, if there's any students that you know that would be interested in any of these things, make sure to tell them to reach out and we'd be happy to give them some more information. So throughout a given year, we also have some campaigns that we run. So this was the campaign that was run last year, which was about COVID-19 affecting students' experiences. And then this past year, we had the Stop OSAP Callbacks campaign. And these are really good just to inform students on different issues that are going on or hear their perspective, hear stories from students that we can then use in our advocacy and just make sure to really get students involved within the advocacy that we're doing.
And we probably have like 5-ish minutes, so I'll try to speed it up a little bit, but we just wanted also to give you an example of some of the work that some of the summer interns have done in the past. So this past year, we had a summer intern, Emily, who was an Indigenous student who helped us write the Indigenous students paper, but she also created a collective of highlighting, or a magazine highlighting Indigenous students artists, which was really, really beautiful. It's available on our website as well. And then Ashiana worked on a capstone project, so a research report, basically talking about the experiences of young adult caretakers and bringing that a little bit more to public discourse. The next couple of slides are just some examples of some of the lobbying that we do. So Steph, Ben, and Catherine all participated in our lobby week this past November. And we basically tried to meet with as many members of provincial parliament and ministers from all different parties. This is the example. You can see Steph on the screen, meeting with Jill Dunlop. She's in a car taking our meeting with it. Fair enough. But yeah, that was this past November. And then this is a recent picture that we actually just had last week when we met with, MPP Glover. It's Laura May Lindo, but she's a critic for colleges and universities. This is an example of meeting with MPP Mike Schreiner from the Greens. And this is an example of when we met with MPP Kathleen Wynne in 2019. We definitely met with other Liberal members this past year, but we didn't get one with Kathleen Wynne this year. And then this is also an example of meeting not only with the political staff, but with the bureaucratic staff. So the ministry, this is when we met with the deputy ministry in December, and Home Office actually has a meeting to more of the technical things, talking specifically about some things on OSAP, and a technical meeting about financial aid with the ministry on Tuesday, actually. So we're going to ask them a bunch of questions that will hopefully help with some of the questions that the authorship team currently has for the student financial aid paper that we're working on. And this is just one example of some of the smaller wins that we've had in the last little bit, even during a pandemic. And this was specifically when the previous minister, Minister Romano, and then the Associate Minister of Women and Children at the time, Jill Dunlop, basically adopted or said that they were going to move forward with 2 of USA's recommendations for making more survivor-centric and more survivor-centric and trauma-informed gender-based violence policies on individual campuses. So that's actually supposed to be coming into play and making sure that all institutions have it by the end of March 2022. So it's coming up.
So as I mentioned before, we have our advocacy priorities that we use every year. So I'm just going to say the titles, and if you want to learn more, you can visit our website or you can ask. So we have affordability, racial equity, sector sustainability, students with disabilities, and then gender-based violence prevention and response. So that's what we were advocating for during our lobby week, and what we kind of focus on throughout a given year.
These are some milestones that we've had over the last few years. This is available on our website in case you want to take a look at it in more detail. So usa.ca, you can peruse all of our policies and all of our government submissions. And then this is always something that we like to highlight in case you want to jot it down. It's called divestudentaid.com. It's basically an interactive case study on how public policy works in Ontario, but they actually used the transformation of OSAP in 2016-17 as a case study, and they highlight USA's advocacy and how we were a main player in proposing those changes, actually. And again, we didn't do this. It was an external body who did this, but it was pretty interesting to learn more about OSAP and also USA. And then this is on the back end, a little bit of an example of how kind of some public policy or some of our policies becomes public policy eventually. This was obviously a big win back in the day, but it shows kind of like how the brainstorming session happened during our think tanks, and then our final USA policy in November 2015, and how that actually influenced the Ontario budget in 2016. Obviously, OSAP has changed since then, but that's just one example of when USA's advocacy over several years was very well received in this case. And maybe right before this, I'll just say, like, we're also doing lots right now in terms of trying to influence this coming cycle, not only for the budget, which will be released in March or by the end of March 2022, but also trying to engage with all the political parties as we go into an election year. So I'm sure Eunice and I will be happy to take any questions, but that's our presentation. And I think we're just finishing up the 15 minutes now. So thanks again for your time, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Eddie and Eunice, for the presentation. If any members have any questions, please just raise their hand and we can get it along. We do have some time budgeted for questions here. I will give everyone 5-ish seconds to raise a hand. Councillor Macri, go ahead.
Thanks for this. I guess this isn't so much a question as a comment, but no, I think what USA does is really important, and I'd like to be able to participate. But you know, looking at when the conference is, like, I've got classes and it's during the week. Yeah. Is it possible to, like, only come for, I guess, like, the weekend part of the conference or something like that if I can't make it? So I guess Thursday to Sunday. Is it possible to only, like, go for the Saturday and the Sunday if I can't do the Thursday and the Friday? Or
I think, like, maybe I'll take a stab at it and then also maybe hand it over to Steph in case they have any perspectives. But I think, like, that's a fair concern, and thank you for being interested in raising that. Like, I think from our perspective, we leave kind of like the selection of the delegates to each association. So honestly, I think WUSA does have a larger delegation. So maybe that's something that you can ask the executive team and Steph leading that in terms of kind of like organizing that stuff. I think it's like, we really do want folks to try to engage throughout the process, just because, like, there are several times to provide feedback, but there also might be ways that to try to accommodate that. Like, for all of our delegates, we send out the policy papers like 2 weeks in advance, so you could provide comments during that. We also ask for consultations throughout that hopefully each member association is working on. So I think there's different ways to try to contribute to that. But I won't try to answer the question because I feel like that's more of a WUSA specific question on how they want to answer or choose their delegations. But I definitely think that if that were the case, we could try our best to try to support Steph and the team and you if that's something that happens. And then we can try to make sure that at least you're getting all the information that you need to provide that feedback, et cetera. So.
Yeah, I'll say on my end, we typically prefer folks who are available to make it for the entirety of the conference. Historically, when it wasn't COVID time, we would actually go to one of the member schools, which, meant that I would be loading you into a van to drive up to Queens. And it would be rather complicated if you needed to jump back in and out of class. But I do know that it's a constraint there. I will note that usually we end up taking the policy paper drafts to EAC, so students who aren't able to attend the conference are able to provide comments and whatnot there. There's a little bit more flexibility again, as Eddie said, because things are online. So like, please bring up in the application if you do decide to move forward with it, what your time constraints are, and we can figure what works out. Unfortunately, I can't have too many people who are unavailable because that makes things really complicated, especially with 11 delegates.
Thank you, Steph and Eddie. Does anyone have any other questions for the user presentation? Going once, going twice. Okay, perfect. Seems like no. Again, thanks for coming up at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning and presenting us. USA does some great work, and have a great rest of the Sunday.
Thank you very much and good luck.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I love your new place, Eddie.
Okay, perfect. I guess, Connor, you can start sharing the live minutes now. And we will. Perfect. I guess I will call this meeting to order at 10:30 a.m. We will start with remarks from the chair, I guess. My remarks are just a reminder that we are running a bit behind this meeting. We have a special order at 10:30 a.m. It's only 10:30 a.m. During that special order, I will be moving to committee as a whole, so we can dispense with the unnecessary complicated Robert rules for most part of the job and have more open chats. Every council will have 4 speaking turns. If any at-large student wants to speak, they can raise their hand, but they will need to be sponsored by a counselor. So just keep that in mind. And I guess we will move on to territorial acknowledgement. The Students' Council of The Students' Council of Waterloo Undergraduate Student Association acknowledges that we live and work on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, land promised to 6 nations, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. As always, please try and learn more about the land you're living in, even if it's not in Waterloo, and learn of the history and how we might have all had the privilege to kind of benefit from colonization, and what we can do to make sure that we are respecting the land we live, work, and eat from, in all honesty. Next is approval of the agenda. I am going to be adding an agenda item under consent, which will be ratification of the Science Caucus members, which have been temporarily designated by the SciSoc. I am going to just paste the motion in the chat, Mike, if you want to just copy it from there. It basically is we're ratifying the appointment of Tarun Sharma as the SciSoc designate, and we're also ratifying the appointment of 3 other people to fill the empty Science Caucus seats. This is just a ratification, and that will happen once we have the consent agenda part of this. And Jay, you have a one in the chat. Go ahead.
Hi, I'd like to motion to strike item 6.3 down.
Okay, we have a motion to strike 6.3. Is that the item that you submitted, Jay?
Yes.
Okay, so basically we are striking the discussion about increasing election turnout in the visa elections. I will second it, I guess. And then Ben, you have a one in the chat. Go ahead.
Thanks, Cannon. Council will know I sent an email on Friday evening to add an item to advise the board on invoking the newly added articles of our bylaw to permit the temporary suspension of our election that is scheduled that our current bylaws require be held before reading week. So I can put the motion text in the chat, and perhaps we can do a swap with item 6.3 with what I send now.
Sure. I will second that motion. So basically, we are technically interchanging the item 6.3 with the item about advising the board to postpone the elections. And anyone has any concerns or anything else they would like to amend in the agenda? Going once, going twice. Okay. I'm just going to assume everyone was okay with it and take it on consensus. We will move on to approval of the minutes. There are no minutes to approve at this time, so we can move on to the item 3. And there are 2 items for adoption by consent. One is the ratifying the service coordinators as presented in Appendix A, submitted by Vice President Dong, and the second was the appointment of the filling the empty seats in Science Caucus. That was submitted by me. Can I just have seconders for both these motions, and then I'm just going to adopt them on consent?
I'll second Cannon.
Represented by Kino seconds. Since this was an item of adoption with consent, we will move on. This has been passed. Seeing as we had a special order at 10:30 a.m. to discuss our governance review, I am going to say we are going to skip the reports for now and move on to item 5.1, I believe. Yes. And the way, again, I guess I will move into, well, there was something to do by President Easton. I'll second, and I will move us into committee as a whole. Again, remember, we are not using the 1s and 2s. There are going to be no direct responses for this discussion. Only raise hand feature will be used. And we are going. So if anyone has anything they would like to add, they can raise hand. But before that, I will let Ben go. Yes.
There is a point of inquiry, which I know we're now, if we've done this committee of the whole stuff, but maybe Steph, if.
Yeah, I just want a clarification on if a member of council is recognizing a member of the gallery. Does that count towards one of their speaking turns?
Everything will be, every question or anything will be kind of put towards me as a chair, and then I will direct discussions based on where they need to be directed. I hope that answers your question, Steph.
Not really.
Can you elaborate what your question was? Or Ben can answer it, I guess.
Ken, I think the question was if a counselor sponsors a member of the gallery to speak, does it count against the counselor's speaking turn?
Yes, it does. Thanks for clarifying that, Steph. And Connor, you have a point of inquiry.
Wait, never mind. I resolved it.
Okay, perfect. I guess we will move on to our actual discussion. We will start with, well, before that, I guess we have invited our consultants or lawyers in this discussion. Please be respectful of everyone who is here. Be respectful of their time, and let's start this fun discussion. Ben, as the mover or somebody, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thanks, Cannon. Yeah, so this is obviously our first reading of a new draft bylaw in line with the recommendations of the governance review report. So I guess we're hoping to get out of this sort of robust comments to send back to our legal team as they prepare a second draft for council to see. I sent in that same email a sort of scheduling poll to call hopefully a special meeting of council in the first week of March where we could receive the bylaws for a second reading. So the logic behind doing a sort of committee of the whole is to minimize the procedural trickery. It'll just be raise your hands, say your questions. And then I think at the end of this session, we'll do sort of some informal straw polls in the chat where people can, if there are sort of definitive questions that we want to have an opinion of council, we can do it in that way. And that's how we will give instruction for the next draft to be prepared at the start of next month. So I guess that's all I will say for now.
Thank you, Ben. I guess the floor is now open for comments from our councilors and at-large members. I will wait till someone raises their hand, I guess. Okay, we have Councillor Macri. Go ahead.
Hi, I have a bunch of feedback. I'm going to send everything I say into the chat afterwards because I know it's a lot. So first, I'd like to give my initial comments on just the text of the bylaws. So that's one issue. So in section 1, I notice there's no definition of like term. The conditions for membership in the corporation refer to term. I assume meaning like, the university fall, winter, spring terms, but the bylaws don't actually specify that. So I think for clarity, we need to add that in. In section 3.02, the bylaws, our current bylaws say that if you get expelled from the university and that your expulsion isn't on appeal, then you're no longer a member. These new bylaws don't seem to have that provision, so I'm wondering if that's an issue if our current bylaws are redundant there. The new bylaws seem to allow anyone to resign as a member like whenever, which seems to just create a very easy process for people to opt out of WUSA fees where they just like fire off an email to the president or something. Currently, our bylaws say like if you're like a conscientious objector or something like that, then you can resign from the corporation. So is it possible to put in something saying that, you need like whatever notarized document or something like that if you're a conscientious objector, if you're going to resign from WUSA. Section 3.07 seems to allow board to just remove students from the corporation kind of at their whims, somewhat arbitrarily. I'm not a fan of that. There's a PO.
I just have a quick question. Are we asking questions right now? I guess it's more a point of inquiry rather than
So basically, I will let Ben answer that, I guess. Go ahead, Ben.
So thanks, Cannon. The whole spirit of doing a committee of the whole session is that we aren't going to be acknowledging points of order or inquiry or any sort of Robert's Rules trickery at this time. It's basically raise your hands, say your questions, and we'll go through it. You don't need to be taking track of the speaking order, Connor, in the live note document because we can just see the hands and we'll go through in that way to sort of minimize the formality. We're just talking about the bylaws.
Okay, good.
I trust this was not counted towards my speaking time. Section 4.01 says, meetings are held in the city of Waterloo unless everyone agrees to hold them outside of Ontario, but there's no provision to hold it inside Ontario, but not in Waterloo. So like, I don't know, say SLC flooded and we needed to find a new venue for our general meeting. Like we couldn't do it in Kitchener for some reason with the rules. I assume that's like just an oversight. We should fix that. Section 4.04 makes no sense to me. I'm not sure what it's trying to say, and it's very confusing to read. Section 4.07, I think quorum should be 100 now. Section 4.07, subsection B, item I, that should, at the end of that, it needs to become an and instead of an or. Making it an or seems to have accidentally reduced quorum to 2 people for a general meeting. I assume that was not intended. I'm also wondering if in-person means like physically in person or if attendance at an online meeting counts as in person and like the in-person just means like not by proxy. Section 5.01, I don't think board should be able to change the size of board, and I think that any changes to the size of board should be approved by a meeting of the members. Section 5.02, for some reason we don't require directors to be members. I think we should require directors to be members. Like the directors should be students. They shouldn't be able to just be anyone. Section 7.02 doesn't say that directors need notice of the first meeting of directors. Section 7.07 says that all directors need to consent to a director attending board meetings like electronically. Because of co-op and stuff, I think directors should be entitled to attend meetings electronically. They shouldn't need the consent of the entire board to do that. Section 7.07 just seems weird, and I think that whole thing should just be in like the rules of meeting procedure and not like at the whims of the chair prior to the meeting with no flexibility. Section 9.09 just talks about the president, but I feel like it should also mention the vice president. Just a general question about the entire bylaws is like, why is it that, so what exactly is the annual meeting and why are we electing board at the annual meeting? Is board no longer going to be elected through like vote.wusa.ca? Are we expecting the students to come to like a GM? Yes, and now some legal questions for the lawyers on the matter of faculty representatives. The existing charter says to act as the representatives of the students, both undergraduate and graduate. Our charter's a bit old. We no longer represent graduate students. Anyway, of the University of Waterloo and City of Waterloo and the County of Waterloo, including, without limiting the generality of the foregoing, those students of various constituent faculties, schools, institutes, departments, and colleges, both affiliated and federated, which are or may from time to time be from time to time a part of or associated with the University of Waterloo. I was wondering if the lawyers could answer if, is this language about students of various constituent faculties, schools, etc., sufficient to constitute various groups for the purposes of the Act? Looking at this language and the Act, like, again, I'm a layperson, it seems we would have the authority to group students into constituencies in any way that kind of reasonably aligns with the university's own governance structures. Is that correct? And if not, just could you explain why? And if that's not correct, like what happens if we do it anyway? Like, I think the Act is still in a transition period until 2024. There's several provisions of the Act requiring corporations to amend their governing documents, such as their charter, to bring them into compliance with the Act. Could we just go ahead and put constituencies in our bylaws and use the next few years to amend our charter to bring it into the compliance with the Act while the Act is still in a transition period? And if that's no, section 23, subsection 4 of the Act says that we can have some directors be appointed by virtue of another office that they hold. So could we designate some new or existing office for each faculty, have the students of each faculty elect someone to that office, then have those people become directors by virtue of that office? For example, can we say that the president of each subsidiary faculty society is a director by virtue of that office? Alternatively, can we direct each subsidiary society to create a new faculty WUSA representative position who is elected by the students in that society and have those people become directors by virtue of this new office they now hold? Or could we say that the undergraduate university senators, since the university is a separate legal entity, for each faculty are directors by virtue of their office as a senator? Another way is subsection 24, subsection 7 of the Act says that directors can appoint additional directors. Could we have a bylaw saying that in addition to the normally elected directors, we will hold elections for the students in each faculty to recommend someone to the board to be appointed as an additional director and require the board to appoint these people? And I guess generally, other than amending the charter, what's the closest thing we can have to each Waterloo faculty having a member on board who is elected to that position by the students in the faculty? And if we can't do this without changing the charter, can we put in our bylaws that the corporation must seek to amend its charter to allow multiple classes of membership and require bylaw amendments providing for constituencies upon the charter being amended? And have a couple questions on the powers of boards.
Vincent,
Yes.
you have taken over the normal 4 minutes, so just say
Alright.
kind of wrap up. Like, I'll give you another minute to wrap up, but just
Okay.
make sure that you're doing
I'm
that
almost
soon.
done my questions. I'll save my recommendations for the next speaking turn. Just have a couple questions on the power of board. Just to set a baseline, what's the minimum amount of power board can have that's legally permissible? And again, for baseline, what's the minimum amount of power board can have that is reasonable? Can we structure the corporation so that board has minimal power on non-advocacy issues? For example, have an advocacy committee that can only be overruled by a supermajority of board after legal counsel advises that it's in the interest of the corporation. Similarly, can we do something similar with societies so that COPs or something like that have power over the rules impacting societies, and again, board can't overrule them without like legal counsel or something like that. And yeah, I'm going to send this wall of questions into the chat because I acknowledge it was a lot, but I had a lot of questions. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Before I let Edward go, I will ask if the lawyers want to answer any of this question right now. You don't need to. I know there are a lot of questions in there. You can take your time. If like you want to like take your time looking at the document that Vincent is providing before you actually answer the questions, that's fine. We can go to the next speaker, and I guess going forward we will try and do one by one like question kind of answer thing, because it makes it way easier to run a meeting. It was my fault that we just had this in a single type of thing, but yeah, I will let anyone from the lawyers decide how they want to proceed right now.
Maybe I'll just comment briefly on there are obviously a lot of questions, and I didn't necessarily catch every one of them, but on the question of faculty representation on the board, if that's something that's ultimately desired, what I would say is that we're looking at different ways in which this can be accomplished. If the objective is to have the student membership sort of divided according to faculty, and each of those subgroups of members would on their own vote for their own representative on the board, that would require dividing the membership into classes, which would require amending the Constitution and not just the bylaws, which has implications in terms of requiring university approval. So that's a point to consider. We're looking at different voting mechanisms that could give rise to faculty representation, albeit being voted on by the entirety of the membership. The question was raised whether ex officio directors could be used in terms of identifying offices within each faculty that would automatically be made board members. That is a possibility, and so that can be on the slate of options considered if there are offices within each faculty that you want to have automatically become directors of WUSA. We can provide for that under the bylaws. So maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you again. Sorry for the bombardment of questions, and but yeah, we will move on to Edward. Go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, I'm not gonna be as long as the previous speaker. I guess I want to just express some of the consultation I got on the topic of faculty representation from what I got from several constituents I talked with over the last few days, which is generally it is something that is very important to them. It is not a deal breaker in terms of they see the pros of this new governance structure and want to see these bylaws move forward, but they would strongly prefer to see that division by faculty in some way, because they feel it would strengthen the governance structure and help with the way WUSA represents the students that it's working for. I think generally what they were looking for was ways of doing this that don't significantly hamper the movement of the government process, which I think you mentioned with the different voting mechanisms you were looking for.
Thank you, Councillor Yang, for that comment. If there is no direct response from the lawyers, I guess we can move on to the next person who might want to speak. Just raise your hand. We have Councillor Kami. Go ahead, Councillor Kami.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what the previous speaker said about faculty representation being incredibly important. I think the feasibility of having de facto officers from faculty societies is a good one. I also know that Ben sent out something about the affirmative action piece that could be used to have faculty representation, which I am also in favor of. Basically, I would like any sort of situation or roundabout legalese that is needed to ensure at least one representative per faculty on the new board. I also, in reading the bylaws, understand that the election of the president and the vice president is done through the elected board, but I have concerns about that internal election of the president and vice president being done through the board and not through the membership, and believe that could run into circles of the general membership of WUSA being discontented that they don't get to actually elect the president and vice president of WUSA, who have more power and more representation. So I was hoping to get thoughts on having direct election of the president and vice president in the new board model.
Thank you, Councillor Kami. Next, we have VP Schwartz. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I won't take long because I know that I've probably had more time to look at these than everybody else, so I'll try not to say too much. I just wanted to chime in with a little bit of my sort of opinions and thoughts. Number one is on the idea of the at-large or these options for constituencies. I know for quite a while I've said that I'm in favor of this at-large model, and I still am, because I think there are some important strengths in having every director who has a responsibility to the whole of the membership being elected by all of the membership. But looking at sort of the option that was sent out about sort of the affirmative action approach to ensuring that you have someone from every faculty on the board, while also electing them at large and having that responsibility and sort of that ownership to all of the membership, I think that that's really effective. I would very much be in favor of that sort of affirmative action compromise. I think that really effectively gives us, someone with experience from every part of the university. There's no faculty that will be without someone with their experience on the board, but they'll be elected at large. It'll be very clear their responsibility to the entirety of the membership and such. And with that, I also wanted to note that we sort of do have that open question of electing at large the president, vice president, or electing of the board. I'm personally a really big fan of electing of the board. I think that it makes the system a lot more effective if the leaders of the board have the confidence of the board, and you can't have them be elected to be at odds with the board. And I think that really makes sense. If all those members of the board, including the faculty members, are elected at large by the membership, then the membership does have confidence in them and can have confidence in the leader that they elect of themselves. So I think that's really effective, and it's sort of like how our government here in Canada works, where the Prime Minister is elected to have the confidence of the House rather than directly elected by the citizens. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, VP Schwartz. Next, we have VP Emo. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to second. That it is most effective to have like a president and vice president that are elected of board, such that board is giving its consent to be governed and to be led by that individual. I've been looking at a lot of other sort of student associations and organizations, and generally when it's the case that the president is elected at large, and then you have a separate sort of at-large election for your directors, a lot of the times they'll exist in tension with one another, and I don't think you would necessarily want that degree of infighting. I would also say that I think when it comes to setting the direction with where WUSA should be going as an organization, that the board members would, typically have a better understanding of what is feasible. So rather than have, all these campaign promises and whatnot that are very minimal or ineffectual things that can't actually be done, we're looking for someone who actually is proposing things that make sense. And I feel like the concern about sort of the amount of power that the president and vice president have, it's my understanding, or at least what I would like to see, that a lot of decisions will have to be made through board ultimately, and that the powers that the executive have would be limited to be only used in special circumstances where an emergency decision or such need to be made. So at that point, I would rather you have a good cohesive working relationship amongst the entirety of board, and you have someone who the board picks amongst itself to be a good leader.
Thank you, VP Emo. Next, we have Representative Aquino. Go ahead.
I guess this is a question more for Ben. Since we're going over the bylaws and since we're trying to implement the new governance model, is the governance committee gonna have to meet to discuss maybe the more possible finer details, or just meet in general, just so I know what to expect in the next coming weeks?
Sure. Thanks, Vicky. So considering that all of the members of the governance committee are present at this meeting of council, like if council decides that we want to sort of refer things to governance committee to make decisions, I don't really expect governance committee to be particularly involved in the bylaw specifically. I anticipate when we start getting into how we migrate our policies and procedures into the new model, governance committee will play a bit more of an active role. So if there is a desire among council to refer like decisions on specific questions to governance committee, I guess that's council's decision to make. But for now, we're here with everybody, so I'm kind of trying to keep the decision at council, I guess I'll say.
Thank you, President Eastern, represented by Kino. Next, we have Councillor Lan. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. I thought that the consultant recommend to the board size should be 5 to 17. What is the logic of being, the size being 13?
I will, I guess, refer this to our consultants.
Hi, yeah. So in the original report, we recommended 13. The reason for that was that we recommended that the president and vice president be elected by the board, which required a prime number and an odd number. And well, all prime numbers are odd numbers. And required that there be a reasonable size for the size of your organization. In the supplementary analysis, I said basically that most boards need to be somewhere between 5 and 17 if WUSA wanted to go in an alternative direction from that which we recommended in the report. So my advice was don't go fewer or higher than that.
Thank you, Matt. I guess I am next.
Sorry, can I ask another question?
You will have to put another hand in the chat.
Oh,
We're not allowing any direct responses.
Okay, I thought like in each speaking turn.
Sorry?
I thought like in each speaking turn, a counselor can ask multiple questions.
Oh, in that sense. Actually, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, that was my bad. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I was reading the. Which section is this? 1 second. Section. Oh, we can find 5.03. The removal of director. It seems that we only need a simple majority to remove a director, not a 2/3 majority.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, I was reading section 5.03 of the new bylaw, and it says basically we only need a simple majority to remove a director. I was thinking if this should be 2/3 majority to remove a director.
I think the simple majority, like, well, I'll let, I guess, the lawyers or our consultants answer, but as the simple majority, suppose a simple majority at a general meeting or like our annual meeting kind of a thing. But yeah, I'll let the lawyers talk about that.
Yeah, and that reflects what is now provided for under the new legislation, which specifically specifies that a simple majority of members can remove a director, and so that's been reflected in the bylaw.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-ups, Jay?
No, thank you.
Okay. I guess this is a small question about the different class of memberships. In our current board system, we have the at-large directors, but then we also have councillor directors in a way, which are voted just by the outgoing council, I guess. So there are this weird two voting populations that are happening right now. So how's not that similar to having constituencies in a way? Let me know if I need to repeat anything.
Is that a question for the legal folks?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of your current system, which was established under the previous legislation, which frankly gave a lot more flexibility in terms of how the membership can vote and how elections can be conducted. You know, the approach that you've taken, under which different components of the board and council are elected by different components of the membership, that doesn't translate as well under the new legislation. Essentially, if there's going to be subgroups of memberships voting alone to elect particular representatives to the board, that's where you need to move to an approach where you have multiple classes of membership, with each class having its entitlement to elect however many directors is determined. And as I say, that's what requires the change to the articles or the charter, not just the bylaws.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yes. Does anyone else have any questions? We have Councillor Macri next. Go ahead, Councillor Macri.
Yeah, so I guess kind of to respond to our earlier discussion, I think that the affirmative action thing for constituencies, like it's an interesting idea if like we need like something temporary while we amend the charter, but like fundamentally, I think if someone's supposed to be, if we want to make sure that someone is able to accurately represent the interests of a faculty, I think they need to have been put there by the students in that faculty, and the like at-large affirmative action doesn't do that. Doesn't actually make sure that the students who like we want the perspective of every faculty. It doesn't make sure that the person being elected to bring forward that perspective actually is necessarily representative of the views of the students there. So I think it's okay as a band-aid solution if we need to amend the charter, but I wouldn't be okay with it as like a permanent thing. I think it's, if we can do the ex officio thing and just designate each society to like appoint someone, I feel like that seems like the easiest solution, and each society can figure it out in a way that makes sense for them. And as for the matter of at large, of the president or vice president being elected by the members versus by board, I guess my main concern is like, what if everyone who's elected to board doesn't want to be president or vice president? Like I think we need something to guard against that in a way, I feel. Or maybe like require candidates seeking positions for board to declare if they intend to run for president or vice president or something like that.
Thank you, Councillor Macri. Ben, do you have a direct response to this, or like just a new point kind of a thing?
I was just going to say general comments.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So I've been taking notes of the conversation, and I have a couple of like ideas for straw polls that we can do. But for now, I'm just going to make arguments about kind of my thing, because I have the pleasure of not being in the chair. So on the question of indirect versus direct elections, my personal opinion is that it probably is favorable to have the direct election of the officers by the membership, where somebody's clearly running to be the president or vice president, because I think there is a substantially like different role that they'll have to play, particularly with our external political organizations and like ex officio membership on the Senate and typically on the Board of Governors for the president. And I think kind of the opposite of what Vincent has just said, where people are going to perhaps might run for board with the intent of being an officer, and if they are unsuccessful in achieving that office, they kind of just bail. And I think it's good. It probably is good for the organization to have a clear expectation that people are running to be officers versus versus sort of election from the board. And I think I know there's been comments on like the risk of, well, what if the officers have substantially like very different opinions than the board itself? It's important to note that both of these bodies will be elected by the same groups of people at the same time. So there's likely to be an affinity on the stances between the directors, however they're elected, and the officers, if they are also directly elected. On at-large versus constituency, I guess I really do appreciate that the like current structure of WUSA has a very important role played by societies in ensuring faculty representation. I am convinced that the at-large voting system and like group quotas and so on is probably the best way to have the most representative board possible. And we've spoken to the last clients of Risser and Hughes, a school, the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology Student Association, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think they have like about 10,000 members. So it's smaller than us, but comparable. They have basically like a point system where of the board in one of their first meetings or in their transition, they basically assign people different roles based on, and they have like a weighted system for how much responsibility each thing takes. So being on, Student Services Advisory Committee might be 1 point, and being a liaison to the math SOC might be 2 points because it's a more, a more like involved role. And I think there's an important semantic element to this where the role of the board is to represent all students and including the interests of faculties. And I think that there is kind of a risk in people being on the board exclusively to represent their faculty's interest or like the interest of their electorate, which my view is it's desirable for us to avoid that. And I think that we can still keep the good parts of faculty representation through an at-large system. That's just my view. And it also appears it will be logistically simpler, which is a benefit. And then sort of one last, this is maybe a bit like frivolous, but I would like to ask the question of council on the name of this body. So like we've been referring to it as a board of directors, and it'll be a board of directors for the purposes of like legislation and so on. But I do think it would be nice to keep the name council. So I might, in our straw polls, like do a WUSA council versus WUSA board. Because council predates the federation and our incorporation. So I think it'd be nice to keep it around.
Thank you, Ben. Next, we have Councillor Yang. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there is probably merit to the idea of having the president be elected directly. Like people said before, people have a stronger association with people they directly voted for, and the discrepancy doesn't seem to be huge between what will likely happen. I feel just in terms of the voting base is still the same for both bodies. It's unlikely there'll be a huge split. If anything, it's more likely they'll be closer aligned. That is my hunch. Since it's not really kind of the votes don't get pooled at one stage, so you have a bit of a discretization of representation, I guess, to put it in math terms. I guess the question I had for the legal folks is, I'm just wondering, in the bylaws, there's a section called executive committee. Could you extrapolate on what the intention of that is? Is that just the president and the vice president, or is that something different? Section 13, I believe.
So the executive committee has been left fairly flexible in terms of its composition in the bylaws, which in practice means that the board would be able to determine the structure of the committee by resolution. The general idea behind having an executive committee is that it's a smaller and more agile body that can act in between regular meetings of the board if there is an issue that requires very fast action and you're not able to convene a board meeting in the necessary time. So The exact composition, as I say, and its exact authorities would be set by terms of reference established by the board. And typically the idea, as I say, is that it's a body that can act more quickly than the board if circumstances require it.
Okay, and I was wondering what the intention with the less than three, they're saying not less than three is, so it has to be at least 3 members of the board?
That's right. That's pretty standard for an executive committee. It would be very unusual to have an executive committee of less than 3.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yang. Next, we have Representative Aikina. Go ahead.
I would like to give my speaking term to, I guess, a gallery member of Nicholas. Nicholas. Canada knows who it is.
All right, Nick, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Keno.
Just to note, you have 4 minutes in your speaking turn.
No
So
worries.
Keep it short.
Thank you. Today, I would like to contest that the unintended effects of this reform, beyond the surface changes we've discussed so far, is the dismantling of checks and balances of our current system. We can all see the need for reform at WUSA, but enabling such power to be concentrated without the primary obligation to the student body is foolish. I trust that the current executive will make clear the strengths of this model, but it is also clear by the collapse of other liberal democracies with equivalent systems to this, that the cracks show not through the current executive or the future executive, but rather through the transition of powers in the time that will follow that. It is of my opinion that the root causes of our institutional changes are not being addressed. We are arguing about the veneers while our core is rotten. I encourage the Councillor Assembly today to consider that the already extant power imbalance between us and the executive will only be worsened over time, and that while our current executive are doing an excellent job, I worry for the future. I would also recommend the Councillor Assembly consider the power that the executive already have in controlling the discussions that we're having today, and whether or not there's value in furthering this divide. We can achieve a more equal and diverse representation for all, but this is a path that leads us away today that we've discussed from the light of a true democracy. I especially want to speak to the part of the bylaw considerations, which discuss the fact that the president will be made chair in future meetings. And I feel like this is one of the most critical parts of the bylaw that does a disservice to a proper discussion. And I would speak to the value of including a speaker role in the future, especially one that already has legal training to some degree, so that we can remove some of the biases that we see in our current model. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Councillor Macri. Go ahead.
I'd like to make some recommendations for us to vote on later during this meeting. I'll send them in chat after. This will not be as long as my first speaking turn. First recommendation is the bylaws should be changed to ensure that each faculty is able to elect at least one member of their faculty to the board, and that such faculty directors will be elected solely by the students in their respective faculty. If necessary, the charter should be changed, and the bylaws should stipulate that the corporation must seek to amend its charter as such. In the interim, while working towards a charter amendment, a reasonably close approximation of faculty elected directors that is legally permissible and ensures views from the students of each faculty are brought to board is permissible. Recommendation 2, legal advice from our lawyers on how to best ensure that fiduciary duty, board confidentiality, and board speaking with one voice cannot be used to silence dissent on advocacy decisions by directors, and if needed, the inclusion of text in the bylaws, policies, procedures, or whatever to ensure that good faith dissent will not be silenced. Recommendation 3, a supplementary document approved by the VPED detailing how advocacy will work in the new model, and a draft procedure for a strong advocacy committee approved by EAC. Recommendation 4, a supplementary document approved by COPS detailing how society relations will be maintained in the new model, and a procedure for a COPS replacement, potentially but not necessarily composed of only society presidents, for example, composed of some number of society executives based on the size of the society. Also approved by COPS. Recommendation 5, the president should not preside over board meetings. Instead, a governance expert with legal training should preside. Recommendation 6, simple one, just reword the bylaws so they don't use his/her and are fully gender neutral, i.e. inclusive of non-binary identities. Recommendation 7, a procedure for how the size of board may change over time, because that will certainly be like a hot potato that will be difficult for board to solve if we don't write that procedure now. I'll send these in chat.
Thank you, Councillor Macri. I'm going to ask if the lawyers have anything they would like to directly respond here before we move on to the next person. Nope, perfect. We can move on to President Easton.
Thanks, Cannon. Yeah, to Vincent's recommendations, I guess I haven't shared this with council, but we were planning to, for example, with this advocacy committee terms of reference that we've been working on and EAC has seen, we were thinking before the new board takes office to have sort of like an omnibus, like here's all of the things that council said, like prepares for the consideration of the new board on stuff like society relations, advocacy, and so on, to a lot of the points that you're making here in your recommendations, Vincent. So I think that's good, and we can definitely consult with like the relevant committees on that. I guess the one thing I'll ask specifically the governance consultants if they can speak to is on the president chairing meetings and in having a third-party expert to chair our meetings and like requiring that they be legally trained, which is like, what does that mean specifically? And like, I don't know if it's desirable to have somebody who isn't a member of the board presiding meetings, if the governance consultants perhaps could speak to that.
Sure. So for a board of this size, it's not customary. Sometimes you'd have an independent chair for example, a plenary session of a conference or something like that. I think I've actually done that a couple times. What I would say is the president not chairing and being removed from their status under these new bylaws as CEO, which makes sense because no president can effectively be the CEO of an organization that size in the term of a year, means that you have a president, the two main offices that you have in most organizations is the CEO and the board chair. So by having the president not be the board chair, you've got a president that has neither of the two main offices that your organization needs. So why have a president would be my comment. If you want somebody with legal training, with expertise, to assist the president, many boards use a parliamentarian or have their corporate secretary undertake training in the legal and parliamentary nature of, chairing a meeting so that that person can advise the president. I think that would also probably be better in terms of that person is likely to be a full-time employee, and then the investment in training them is more likely to, be sustained over years rather than having to reinvest it in the president year over year.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak? If you ask, raise your hand. Go ahead, President Easton.
Thanks again. So I guess the three questions that I think we should do straw polls on are on, I guess, so we're in sort of an informal session here, but so I have perceived these questions in sort of like a binary where there'll be two options, and I'll put them in the chat and you can like respond with whatever emoji to indicate your preference. So the three questions I have are at-large versus constituency, direct versus indirect elections of the officers, direct being like they're elected at the same time as the board, indirect is they are elected by the board. And then the third question I have is the name, board or council. I guess before I put those in the chat, if anybody has other questions that we think we should ask, this would be a good time so we can like make sure we're asking the right questions, I guess.
Vincent just posted everything he sent in the chat before, but I'll let Ben you think about that, and till then VP Short, so you have a speaking turn. Go ahead.
Hi, I don't really want to say something. I more just want to I guess, ask out loud because I've just been thinking about this now. So it's mostly to you, Ben. I guess when it comes to a lot of these other questions that, the members of this body are asking and sort of some thoughts that people are bringing forward, for example, a lot of things that Vincent has come up with, but things other people have said, I guess, how do you think that we're going to go about making sure we take all this into account? Although I suppose some of it, sorry, I'm thinking halfway out loud. Some of it is about stuff that's going to follow the bylaws, but it's, no, you know what? I'm sorry. I was just thinking out loud, and I think I've answered my own question in my head. My apologies.
Thank you. Next, we have VP Dong.
Yeah, sorry, not so much a question, but just a pre-straw poll note, where I really want to emphasize that there are obviously a lot of benefits to having faculty representation laid out in our board, but also that there are a lot of other facets of diversity and representation and unique experiences that are worth considering when it comes to the type of representation that we want to see on board. And that faculty representation is certainly the one that we've used up until now, and it's probably worth saying that it's the set of constituencies that the university uses as well. But when it comes to students, there are a lot of different axes of diversity. You have co-op versus non-co-op, and international versus not international, and you have people in different stages of their education. You have mature students, you have I don't know, in province, out of province. You have more like specific identities when it comes to gender or ethnicity and all of those things, where locking ourselves into deciding what is important decreases our ability to make decisions based on other axes of diversity, which I don't think is necessarily the best way to go.
Thank you, VP Dong. Next, we have Councillor Yang.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge VP Dong's points of diversity, and I do agree that there are benefits. I think, though, there are key things about having faculty representatives that have been pointed out to me that I want to make known, which is the idea that operationally there are a lot of things the societies deal with that, and faculties deal with, but specifically societies deal with on the operations that they need to liaise with USA on often. And oftentimes what faculty societies have felt is that link to WUSA directly has been strained or difficult or hard to work with sometimes, and that having these counselors on having faculty specific counselors has helped fill that liaison role in some way. And I know there's been discussion of having liaison specific roles, but I think it is something important that a function that they fill that isn't quite captured by other ways dividing up the groups.
Thank you, Councillor Yang. I'm just going to lower both of your hands. Thank you. Do we have anyone else that would like to speak before we do straw polls? Nope. So, okay, we have two people. Sorry. Azarudin, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Let me know how to pronounce it correctly, and then hopefully I can do it next time.
That was correct. That was perfectly fine.
Thank you.
I was wondering when people were going to get to answering Vincent's questions, because I was actually interested in hearing those answers for his questions.
I'll direct that question towards either Ben or legal advice, but my opinion would be like it will take Laura some time to actually look at the legal impacts of these things. So it might just come as like a response document after the meeting is over, and then at the second meeting we can discuss those responses and also the changes that they have made. But yeah, because like I'm pretty sure like these are complicated matters which require more thought than can be provided in a single meeting.
But I'm almost certain some of those questions were reasonable enough to be explained now, and they weren't all legal questions.
Could you elaborate on like which ones? So like maybe I can like point to people to answer those questions then.
Sure. I mean, I think Vincent would be best to ask because they are his questions. I'm just interested in most of them. But Sure. I think there's like hashtag. Generally, how do constituencies, other than amending the charter, what is the closest thing we can have each Waterloo faculty having a member on board who was elected to that position by the students and the faculty? That didn't sound like a question when I said it, but that was the question he asked, and it is a question.
Sorry, I'm just reading the question again. I think you're talking about what are the ways we can do the faculty representation with the charter changes, you said?
Yes.
I think the question was without charter changes was my question, because we know we can do it by changing the charter.
I guess if I'll refer that to the lawyers. I think, Vincent, if you just repeat the question for more clarity for them, and then we can see if they have an answer for that or not yet.
Yeah, so the question was, other than amending the charter, what is the closest thing we can have to each Waterloo faculty having a member on board who was elected to that position just by the students in that faculty? So like, I think I asked about like creating ex officio offices under like the sub-societies, having board members like appoint people who are like, like having like an election and then board members appoint those people. So it's kind of like an indirect election. So like, I guess either of those, or if there's any other way to, just the core thing is have a member from each faculty on board and that member be elected only by the students in that faculty.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, lawyers. Sorry, I cannot see your name without pointing to your screen, so I just call lawyers. But yeah, go ahead.
That's okay. I answer to lawyers. I think if the objective is, without amending the charter, to provide for a mechanism whereby the members of each faculty alone can elect a representative, or can be involved in selecting a representative for the WUSA board, I think that probably the mechanism that would best get you there would be using the ex officio provisions and establishing within each faculty an office that would automatically, the holder of that office would automatically become a director of WUSA, and then it would be for the faculty to determine how that office is appointed, whether that's by an election by the members of the faculty or some other mechanism. That's essentially the bottom line would be that office would be automatically made a director of WUSA. And I guess there'd be a further question as to whether that sort of ex officio approach would be in addition to an at-large election of other board members, or whether the idea would be that would be the sole mechanism by which directors are essentially put on the board.
Thank you. Next we have Mike, who has his hand up. Go ahead, Mike.
Just a general question. There's been some talk about like constituency representation on the board versus at large, and then if at large, then we would delegate some sort of liaison positions to make sure constituencies were brought in, and other, like Catherine mentioned, other like axes and dimensions of diversity would also be addressed. Is there a way to also do that if it was constituency? So like make sure that there is somebody who liaises for co-op students specifically, and like students like municipal needs and stuff like that?
Yes.
Yep, go ahead, Matt.
Well, yeah, you would do it for those potential, because the liaison thing is a council or board dictated policy. You would have something that says these groups are entitled to board members as liaisons, so they would just, presumably you wouldn't need them for the constituencies that are represented, and could just provide them for the constituencies that aren't.
Thank you, Matt and Mike. Next we have Stephanie. Go ahead, Steph.
When you call me by my full name, I get nervous.
I know. I'm sorry. That's why I said go ahead, Steph, later.
Yeah. This might be me shooting myself in the foot here, but something that I think we should have a straw poll on is whether or not council trusts the executive to carry out the remainder of the governance review process in a way that is democratic and respects councillors' ability to engage. I've been sensing some frustrations on that end from various folks, and I think it's important to, you know, um, I don't know, identify where we stand and if that relationship of trust has been broken, and if so, what are the ways that we can essentially regain that and make sure council feels comfortable in the way we're going forward. I know as an average counselor, this stuff gets really complicated. You're doing school and other stuff, and you don't have time to look over all the documents and whatnot. I'm very cognizant of that. But I want to make sure if we're making any governance reforms that everyone feels as if they were able to engage meaningfully in the process, and that not that they were railroaded. And I know some people feel that way, other people don't really, but it would be helpful for me to get a sense of where we're standing there. And I'll just say that, like, when you answer that question, keep in mind that, at the end of the day, like, I wouldn't consider, like, I guess it's more like, do you feel that you've been able to speak your piece and that you have been heard? Um, not necessarily that you've gotten what you've wanted, because at the end of the day, like, no one's going to get everything they want. But like, do you feel like you've been able to engage in that process? And do you think that moving forward, um, you can trust that you'll be respected moving in the process? Sorry, that was a little bit rambly.
No worries. Thank you for that question. I guess I will let Ben add that into straw polls. And I had a quick question from a follow-up about the ex officio thing. Let's say if we are allowing our societies to hold the elections for us for those positions, and then because in this position, they become the members. Is it possible for us to say like they actually have to be elected and not just appointed by the society? Like, are there any procedures? Because like, I don't want to be like, it actually has to be like, in my opinion, like students should be allowed to elect their board members, and it should not be just like, oh, someone's involved in the society and they get appointed because they're friends with the person who's in charge of appointing that position. Like, is that something within our bylaws that we can say that this needs to happen, or would that kind of be a weird thing with the new act and the class of memberships if we go down that route? I think that was, yeah, for lawyers again.
For the lawyers, yeah. I mean, I think what I would say is, I think there's some aspects of if the ex officio route is something that that you want to explore. I think there are some pieces that we'll need to take away and think about from a procedural standpoint and how it gets reflected in the bylaw. I mean, generally speaking, the way ex officio directors are typically appointed is that what the bylaws say is that the person holding, and then it just identifies the office, is by virtue of that fact made a director. In terms of whether the bylaws themselves can be prescriptive in how that person is appointed to that office, and whether that might be seen as essentially trying to circumvent what would normally be a requirement to have membership classes, that's something I think we'd want to take away and give a little bit of thought to, and give you a little bit more informed answer than what I've got off the top of my head. So it's not a complete answer to your question, except to say that it's something that we're happy to look at and provide some further comment on.
Okay, just wondering, yeah, that would be great. Next is Vincent, and also there's someone at my door, so I'll be back in a minute. And if I'm not, Ben, can you just take over for like 2 minutes for chairing the meeting if required?
Sure.
Thank you. Go ahead, Vincent.
You're muted.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I assume Ken would want to hear the answer to this question, but well, he's gone. Even if it ends up being that we can't require in our bylaws that they be elected, I assume there would still be nothing stopping a society from deciding to have them be elected. And I guess another step from there is, even if it's not in our bylaws, but maybe we put it in like our memorandum of agreement with the societies that it be elected. Now that's not like a bylaw, but it's still, somewhat has force. I guess is that, likely to be fine? Again, with the caveat, you need to spend more time looking at it in detail.
Yeah, with that caveat, I think in principle, certainly, the society or the faculty could determine how the officer gets elected, and that could be by an election of the faculty members or the student members of that faculty. To the extent that you have agreements with the faculty, I think it could potentially be provided there as well. So I think that there are mechanisms that can likely be used to provide for that. But as I say, I do want to take that back and make sure we've looked at it fulsomely.
So I want to make sure you're understanding the question correctly. When I'm referring to the faculties, I'm really referring to the faculty societies, which are like sub-societies of WUSA. They're not separate legal entities. They're kind of like subsidiary groups. It's not like the university faculty. It's like the subsidiary group that WUSA has established to look after the students in each faculty. Just want to make sure that distinction doesn't really change the answer.
Understood. I don't think it changes the answer. Again, I'd want to understand, I guess, how they're constituted and how as a society it makes decisions. But subject to that, I think in principle there would be mechanisms by which you could establish that the officer that is then made a director of WUSA is elected by the members of the society.
Thank you. Winston, I'm assuming you don't have any follow-ups. Perfect. Next we have Azharuddin. Go ahead.
I give my time to Nicholas.
Thank you, Councillor Mohammed. Friends, I ask you to consider the value of constituencies today and recognize their value. The diversity we seek to include, as mentioned by Catherine Dong, is only stifled by the reduction in the size of our representative body. Faculty representation is not all, and it's in fact far from it. But the inverse reaction to reduce us to an at-large group does not in fact increase our access of diversity, but instead opens us up to a tyranny of the majority. While I value the plurality opinion, by moving this full model, we do a disservice to the marginalized, and we should consider the plight of a minority group to be worth our time. As such, we need to increase the size of council, not reduce it. I recollect a statement made to me earlier this week that, in fact, we only have a single Black member of our council today. And given our bulk population of Waterloo, I cannot fathom how restricting our board further would improve this representation. Therefore, if I had a power before this assembly, I would easily I would be apt to move to vastly increase the size of board in recognition of this difficulty. I see that we, in fact, seek two disparate wills today. The first is to collect the voices of the people, and especially the marginalized. And the second is to increase our engagement of our membership, and especially that of the voting population. However, as we've seen through the introduction of our science counselors today, I feel that there is in fact not a total absence of interest with the WUSA Council, but rather an apathy to the system's lack of visible work in the first place. I conclude with this. In absentia of a representative council, and with the new legal obligations brought around by the fiduciary duty, as well as other requirements of a board member, what guarantee can the students see asserted over the right to a voice on the board? In the system proposed, I see none, and I worry that these proposals will only exacerbate our current strife. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Yang. Go ahead.
I want to go off in a bit of a different direction to what was happening, which was, I know we've brought up the idea of amended charter. Can we have an actual idea of how difficult that would actually be? Because that seems to be the simplest solution to get what we're trying to achieve. And like, is it going to delay this by like 5 years or like 6 months? I was wondering if you get legal's thoughts on how involved that process would be.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is that to the extent that university approval is required, it would require, I guess, understanding what their timelines would be, and I'm not really in a position to say what that would be. Ben, you may have more of a sense of this than the legal folks do.
If I can cut the line here, Cannon. Okay. So I guess it is definitely not doable on the timeline to have a bylaw ratified to have an election this spring. But then I guess the question back to Andrew is, is it possible for us to basically at the same time that the general meeting ratifies this new bylaw, if we get there with a constituency model, have like a resolution of the general meeting to say we are going to work towards amending our charter by this date, in such a way that we can have like a guaranteed constituency rep. And I guess, like, I think it probably is, I'm saying my opinion again, so you be warned, but like, I think it's probably better to have like a true constituency model where everybody is a constituent than to have sort of a hybrid system where there is like some people have a dual role and others are, at large. It probably just is better for the organization to have like clear expectations that you are on the board to represent your constituency, and the composition is done in such a way that it balances out the interests of the faculties proportionally, than to have this sort of like hybrid system, is my 2 cents.
Can I just quickly reiterate my question? I'm just asking, like, how feasible is it to actually even just get our charter changed? Like, how difficult would that be?
Yes, that's towards either Ben or our legal counsel.
So we would need basically the it requires the consent of the Board of Governors, and then you're working on university time. So like if we have been telling administrators about like the governance process ongoing, but I honestly can't say like how long it would take. And then that kind of goes to the, can we do these changes before we change the charter? Question of before. I don't know if there's like, maybe Andrew, like about like how long it takes to deal with the province to like file articles of amendment and so on.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the very last part of your question in terms of the filing of articles of amendment.
How long that would take to deal with the province on that?
Dealing with I mean, it's essentially passing articles of amendment simply as a matter of the requirements under the corporate statute, and then filing them with the province. All of that is quite straightforward. The key timing issue that applies in WUSA's case, it doesn't apply with most corporations, is the additional requirement of the university approval. So once that can be secure, the actual process, articles of amendment would need to be approved by the membership and council and the board, or I guess it depends on how we're doing it. I'll back that up one step. So if we pass or if you pass revised bylaws without doing a charter amendment, those new bylaws would then govern the process by which further amendment is, to the articles is approved. It would be possible at the meeting at which the bylaws are approved to have a resolution essentially directing or indicating an intention to move forward with articles of amendment, moving to a more institutionalized constituency model. There would be details that would need to be worked out, and it would all need to go back to the membership to be approved. But that kind of two-step process could be undertaken and could be, approved in principle by the membership when they pass a set of bylaws that don't involve a charter change.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Kami. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate my strong belief that we should have faculty constituencies, and I think that we also need to have a discussion about the affirmative action piece that was sent by Ben in the email, because I believe that's a good middle ground that would not require changing the charter and would also not require some convoluted way of getting faculty societies to elect WUSA board members. I feel like that system, while it could work and does provide faculty constituencies, it could be very complicated and very misleading for those who are interested in sitting on the new board / council, whatever we're calling it. So I'm strongly in favor of the affirmative action piece for faculty constituencies, but I also think that we should get back to doing at least a straw poll for this question, because we're having all these conversations about faculty constituencies and what's that going to look like when we don't even know if that's what we want to change it to. So I don't know like what mode that would be, but I think it's important just to like reiterate that yes, we do want the new bylaws to have a built-in mechanism for faculty constituencies, or no, we don't, because I feel like that'll help direct the rest of the conversation for this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Kami, and that is a good point. So after the next 3 people in the speaking order speak, we will be going to straw polls, at least on discussion, and then we can continue our conversation. Also, yeah, never mind. Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Thank you. I promise I didn't work together with the previous counselor, but I will endorse most everything she had to say. I think it makes a lot of sense. In particular, I think that how the specific model works is going to be one of the things that we could find works a little bit differently once we're working with it in practice, and that it might be that one specific implementation sounds really great right now, but doesn't seem so great after a year or 2 living in it, and we want to change it. So I think that we should go with something like the affirmative action model that is easy to implement and that, in my opinion, makes a lot of sense to be able to work well on its own. But then have a 1 or 2 years down the road, a mandatory review for the board to reassess itself and say, hey, is this working? Is this meeting the goals that we wanted in terms of student representation, engagement, and such? And then if it makes sense at that stage, look at these other more exhaustive options. But I would really strongly endorse the simpler model to implement that gives us the flexibility to explore stronger constituencies or changing the charter down the road if it's something that seems necessary. We don't know yet.
Thank you, VP Schwartz. Next, we have Councillor Mohammed. Go ahead.
I yield my time for Vincent to speak again.
Sure, go ahead, Councillor Macri.
I kind of want to respond to what the president and Councillor Kami were saying earlier. On the matter of hybrid versus pure constituency, I do think the hybrid system has a lot of value. The fact is, like, which faculties exist at the university doesn't really change over time. Like, I think it's been decades since like we last created a new faculty. It's going to be very rare that aspect of representation ever changes. But the other aspects of diverse representation that the Vice President Student Life was talking about, that fluctuates over time. Which groups need representation and which ones, don't necessarily need like a dedicated liaison. That's going to shift very much over time. And I think the liaison system works well for those groups that are more in flux in terms of how big of a proportion of the student body they are, whether or not like that's even a group in the student body. But faculties don't really change almost ever, and they're such a core thing of how the University of Waterloo itself is structured and how students experience just the university that I think it's very much worth having those, requiring those faculty representatives and then keeping the liaisons for all those other groups that shift over time. I'm going to disagree that the ex officio system is necessarily complicated. Again, we're going to need like an answer from the lawyers on more detail, but depending on the way we're legally able to set it up, maybe we can just run that election alongside the other elections, and students just see as they do now, at-large representatives, faculty representatives, and they don't it's not necessarily going to be some complicated thing that's difficult for students to grasp. It might very well, from as far as students are concerned, be an incredibly simple system. And I think it's premature to assume either way at this point. Although either way, I do really think the importance of having that person put in place by the students in that faculty is crucial. And that's why I think the affirmative action model, it seems like a strange band-aid that I'd really only be in favor of it if nothing else works and it's just like a temporary measure while we amend the charter. But I really do think the ex officio system, it might work perfectly well, and maybe we don't need to amend the charter at all. If the ex officio system is a little bit intricate or tricky to work out, but it's still doable, in that case, I would suggest we employ the ex officio system kind of as an interim solution while we seek to amend the charter, and we have text in our bylaws requiring that we seek to amend the charter.
Thank you, Councillor Macri. Councillor Yang, I'm going to remind you we are no longer taking any speaking turns before we move to the straw polls. So
Did Canon freeze for anybody else? Okay. Okay.
Question to the lawyer before we move
timing.
to straw poll, and then we can come back to the discussion. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I guess I will repeat my question, which was, is there are there any consequences of us changing our charter to kind of include all these memberships in it as separate things, which we might not be considering while we're making this decision, if you want to make a change to our charter or not? Sorry, that was a question for our lawyers.
Yeah, and that it's
Can you understand me? Okay, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, it's something that we may want to get back to you on, sort of setting out in writing so that it's clear. If the charter is amended to provide for, say, membership classes representing the different faculties of different societies, there are provisions under the legislation that require class votes in certain circumstances, meaning that for a given measure to pass, it needs to be approved by the members of each class as a class. And so what that effectively can amount to is a class veto that would be held by the members of each classes over certain types of fundamental decisions. So I think what we'd want to do is set that out for you so that you have a clear picture of what the implications would be if you did move to a multiple class membership structure.
Thank you. And just to say, Edward, Councillor Yang actually does have a speaking turn, but we made a rule that we will be moving to straw polls before we actually start any more discussion to figure out if council actually wants constituencies or not. So if Ben, you are ready with the straw poll.
Yeah, sure. So what I'll do is I'll put in like multiple comments for, I'll do 3 for the question of at-large, constituency, and like an affirmative action, hybrid, or ex officio. And I imagine, I guess, how this will work is the lawyers will I suppose get back to us with like concrete concrete opinions on the questions that have been raised here, and then maybe we can have like a suite of options and present, like at second reading, we can maybe decide on between options or something like that. But so I'll put in the first comment will be at large. So that is basically what was recommended in the report, where everybody can vote for anybody. There's droop quotas, and then we'd have like a liaison system where people are assigned to work specifically with each faculty. COPS continues to exist, etc. Then a constituency model, meaning like strictly constituents, that every member of the board is like from a faculty, and whatever charter amendments we need to do that. And then the third one will be sort of the affirmative action / hybrid, where basically, like as I described in my email on Friday, where anybody can vote for anybody, but then there's basically a provision in elections procedure that picks the person from each faculty, registered in each faculty with the most votes, to guarantee there's at least one seat occupied by a person from each faculty, provided that they, like, actually there's somebody that is willing to run from each faculty. So you can vote for as many as you want, I guess is probably the best way to do this. And it'll be like an approval vote, I think is what you call this. So people should see the
approval voting, yeah, Ben.
So people can just thumbs up whatever options they like. And then I guess Cannon and Mike will consider, like, I guess it'd be counselors voting on this, just because it'll ultimately be council that we need to approve the bylaw. And we'll leave this open for a minute or two.
Also, while people are voting, I would just like to remind everyone, we have spent about an hour and a half on this discussion. We have other things on the agenda after this, so hopefully we can move a bit faster going forward if we want to continue this discussion, and otherwise we can move to the actual reports and the other motions on the floor after this.
And Cannon, if I can
go ahead.
Speak. Then I guess we should also, there are, I guess, 3 more questions after this one to do quick straw polls on. But if we're going to be finished discussion here, I guess my question is, do our guests need to continue to be present, or can we thank them for their time? If we're just doing straw poll voting at this time, we can just inform them of the result.
I guess we can like spend 10 more minutes after the straw polls just to have some final discussion, and then we'll let our guests leave.
So, Ben, could you explain again what the 3 options were? Is affirmative action / hybrid, does that include like the ex officio system or the amending the charter options? Okay.
I think, like, because we'll get an opinion on like what is feasible, and then based on the, like, I imagine that for second reading, we're probably going to have like several options of what to do, unless subsequent to this, we want to like empower governance committee to make a decision on behalf of council, which might be desirable, honestly, to kind of like have a smaller body so we can have decisions made before our second reading.
Again, councillors, please do vote. I don't think everyone who's on this call has voted. I will wait for 10 more seconds before I guess we'll stop the voting.
I will just let you know that there are other people, non-councillors in the call, who are able to vote, so keep an eye on that.
Yeah, Mike, I trust Mike to be looking at that. You're doing this.
Not this is an actual form of vote, this is just a straw poll to get opinion of the body.
Yep. Okay. That is all the time we have for the straw poll. Based on from what I can see, I guess people prefer affirmative action / hybrid. And I think all the people who voted for that are people who actually have voting power on council. So we should be good. Ben, do you want to put the next straw poll?
Sure. So this will be on direct or indirect election of officers. So directly elected by students or indirectly elected by board. So again, you can vote for both if you want. So Canon, I might suggest that it looks like there's a clear majority.
Yep. So we will, on the results for, I guess, directly elected by students as preferred by most people. We will next move to the next straw poll.
Okay, so this is the third of 4 on the name. So I'll say WUSA Council or WUSA Board. Same deal. And if people want to like abstain, then maybe we can suggest anything that isn't a thumbs up is an abstention. I know people have put hearts already, but if you can switch to thumbs up, just if people want to abstain from the straw poll.
Wouldn't just not voting it be abstaining?
Yeah, although we tend to wait for how long, like we tend to judge if the voting is concluded by how many people have reacted. So it would help for that. But I think it looks.
There's a clear winner here with WUSA Council.
Okay, then the fourth question is, I guess, to Steph's point about executive confidence. I don't know, Cannon, if you have it might be a conflict of interest for me to decide how to pose this question.
I think we should kind of, first of all, we should have this somewhat of a secret ballot because the people should be allowed to freely vote on this. So like more like a form sent for this.
So do you suggest like perhaps doing this asynchronously, like outside of the meeting? Or
I think what we can do is, do it asynchronously outside the meeting, and we can bring up a discussion on that at the next meeting because it's just going to take too much while otherwise, and we already have a lot of things on our agenda. But I guess I'll work with Mike to create a form and send it via our email or something after this meeting ends, and then we can see what happens. Connor, you have a raised hand. Is it like something procedural or?
I just had a quick question about question number 2, I believe. It's the one about directly being elected by students versus indirectly being elected by a board. I know that there were votes on either side casted. Would it be possible to do it in like a hybrid approach where we look at a certain percentage amount of like votes by students, but also look at what the board is proposing to elect and make a decision based off of both?
I think, in my opinion, that becomes way too complicated. But obviously, like if that's what council is thinking of doing, we can definitely look into that. But yeah, because then you have to figure out at the GM, like because people will be electing them at the GM, from my understanding, and then at the same time you have to let the people who have already been appointed to the board vote, and then do this weird calculation thing happening at the like in a synchronous manner while the GM is running. Does that make sense? But I'll also let VP Schwartz answer that, I think.
I wasn't going to answer. I realized I sort of had one sort of half question / clarification, which is it's my understanding that the plan to proceed forward is that it will be like, an at-large election through like a ballot like vote.wusa that will be confirmed at the GM, not voted for at the GM.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
My understanding.
I guess I'll pose that question to our lawyers. Like, is that something that we can do, or because from my understanding, we could only elect directors at the GM itself?
Yes. So the election itself technically happens at the general meeting, but there's various mechanisms for advance voting or having proxies so that effectively students are able to vote for a period of time prior to the actual meeting date. But it's the meeting date where the votes are actually formally counted and the vote is considered to be taken.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. So I guess we can think of what Connor did. Ben, do you just want to do it? Like, what does council think about this? Like, just make another comment about hybrid elections for officers.
So I can, if I can speak to this.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So like in the supplementary analysis that Risser and Hughes prepared, they talked about hybrid election of officers, but in the sense of like the president, for example, be directly elected and the vice president elected by the board. I don't think, like, a lot of the motivation for this governance review has been to like rid ourselves of complication, and doing some sort of like weighted vote among the board and the membership seems very confusing, to be frank. I guess, like, I think we had a pretty decisive vote, and people understood the vote to be electing during an election period students, everybody can vote for the officers, versus like at the first meeting of the board electing the officers. So I don't know if we should really do a straw poll on that. It's kind of my view, but I'm happy to write a question if you would wish, Cannon.
I kind of agree, but like I don't want to like kind of railroad through this idea if someone has proposed that idea. So I'll leave that up to Connor. If you think we should be doing that, I'm more than happy to put a straw poll there.
I mean, like, why not? It's an idea.
Sorry?
I mean, like, why not? Like, it's an idea.
Sure.
It takes what? Like 5 minutes.
Okay.
Then I guess we'll just do a straw poll.
Okay, so within direct election. Okay,
Ben,
we'll just redo it. It'll be direct elect officers, indirect elect officers, or hybrid elect officers. Where the first option is students vote in an election period to like pick the president and the vice president in a campaign. Indirect is the first meeting of the board picks among themselves a president and a vice president, and the hybrid is somewhere in between this, where students get to have a vote, but then the board can override it in some fashion to be determined. Thumbs up are the only ones that will be considered for a vote. Anything else will be considered an abstention.
Seems like we have a clear winner of direct elect officers. So I guess we should be good in that sense. And we will move on back to the discussion now. Edward, I know you were part of the speaking list before. Do you still want to continue?
Can I just verify, are we doing counting speaking turns? Committee of the whole, I wasn't sure how formal we're being.
I think we were kind of doing like 4 speaking turns. It's just like not one person kind of just speaking throughout their time and everyone gets to speak. But like you still have 1 turn. I think that the 4 was made because you were added to the speaking list, but you actually didn't get to speak. So you technically have used 3 of those 4 speaking terms.
Okay, I just wanted to ask the lawyers to extrapolate on the impact of adding classes to a chair, because you mentioned something about veto, and I'm not sure exactly how bad that implication would be for the way we run things.
What it would mean is that for matters under the legislation that require a class vote, and we need to go back and confirm exactly what all of those matters are. you might need to secure the approval of each class of members as a class and not just the membership as a whole. So it would change the approval process for certain types of changes. So for example, if there were going to be a charter change, if you institute a class membership structure, and then somewhere down the road you want to institute a further change to your charter or to your articles, that might require approval by each class of members, not just by a vote of the membership at large. So it would have implications in terms of the approval process going forward.
I see. Thank you.
Next, we have VP. Well, actually, I'm going to let the consultant go first, and then I'll come back to you, Stephanie. Steph. I'm so sorry, but yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Hey, just where your majority was clear on directly electing officers, I will need to know, do you see that as an addition to the 13 members? So 13 would become 15, or that the representatives themselves would go down to 11? You just need to decide that one way or the other.
I think based on like the way we have discussed this, it would become 13 going down to 11, and then the officers would be elected directly, so it will still remain 13 as a board member. Unless someone has a different opinion, say now, otherwise no. Seems like everyone agrees with me. It's rare, but it happens sometimes. We will move to Steph for their speaking turn, I guess.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I could get, I guess, a take on the governance consultants and also the lawyers on this, but like something like I understand the appeal of a single governing body, but it feels as if there are certain things that we want as part of our system that, you know, is atypical for a normal nonprofit, in which case it might not make sense to have a single governing body. I know that we have a lot of issues when it comes to sort of different entities fighting with each other for power and there being like a massive overlap of responsibilities in a way that makes it confusing, and also people not prepared to take on operational decisions and whatnot. But I'm wondering if it would make sense then to keep the current way that we're electing board and have them mostly focus on the whole legal and financial duties of the organization, and then have council, which then we can decide to elect, you know, constituencies and representatives, because I imagine that doesn't conflict with the non-for-profit act there, but have it be a smaller body and have those basically function in terms of the stakeholder view that the governance review was sort of getting at. So you would have board members who oversee, you know, the financial matters and whatnot, but they're less involved, is not as much work, so they don't need to be, you know, compensated in the same way. But like currently we have structures that ensure those people have experience. And then I don't know, it seems like you could get a similar sort of outcome in terms of fixing some of our issues that way without creating what I'm seeing as a little bit of a Frankenstein right now.
Want to go first, Andrew?
I mean, in terms of, you know, I'm mainly answering these questions just in terms of what's legally possible. You know, the way the legislation works essentially is that ultimate responsibility rests with the board. And so in terms of splitting responsibilities of the board into multiple bodies, with the exception of, you know, powers that can be delegated to, say, an executive committee, you know, it's essentially a model in which the board retains sort of plenary authority. It would certainly be possible to establish different committees that have, you know, advisory functions, say for advocacy matters. I know that's been discussed on a number of occasions. for the board as a matter of policy to be highly deferential to those committees. But in terms of actually splitting, having multiple committees sort of acting as, or multiple governing bodies acting as checks and balances in the way that you currently have your board and student council, that frankly isn't as well accommodated by the legislation. And so if there's a strong desire to move in that direction, we'd have to, we'd have to think a bit as to how far we can take you in that direction in terms of what's legally possible. But I'll leave it to the governance consultants in terms of their input on that.
You're muted, Matt.
Sorry, there's always one. Steph, I also think it's not advisable from a governance perspective. I think the issue is not creating a Frankenstein here, but that you guys have a Frankenstein that we're trying to simplify. Now, how much of that Frankenstein you're comfortable leaving residual, that's what we're trying to determine, right? Like, so the report recommended a very sort of simple standard structure. And the sense I'm getting from this meeting is that we got to back that up a little bit because there's concerns about constituency representation, direct election. I mean, that's fine, that's easy. But we have to figure out how to keep the simplest structure that we can while maintaining the things that are important to the concerns that have been expressed and validated here at council. So there's some work to be done there. I think the affirmative action solution is somewhat elegant. I think it's going to be difficult to figure out exactly how that works in practice. What it'll really involve if you maintain an STV system as you have now is that certain people might just sort of jump the queue of establishing quotas. But at the same time, the STV system lends itself to strong constituency representation through a quota model anyway. So there may be minimal changes. You're just basically providing insurance. But yeah, I don't see that as a creating a Frankenstein. I would see having multiple bodies in a sort of bicameral or separation of powers kind of structure. You're going to have multiple vetoes. You're going to that's a road to all kinds of problems.
Thank you, Matt and Steph. Steph, do you have any other questions?
No, I do not.
Perfect. I guess this will be the last call for questions for our guest and this discussion. So if anyone has anything, please raise your hand. And we don't really accept points of orders in a committee as a whole. Vicky, so just raise your hand and then we can deal with it. But Edward, you're next. Go ahead.
I just kind of had a more of a request than a speaking turn. I want to ask, would it be possible for advice to be given on the questions that have been raised in the chat by members from our legal team? Is that something we could do before the next council meeting? I know there's some questions there that weren't fully answered, that's all.
I will defer that to Ben or our lawyers, but go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, if people can send me an email by the end of today, I will. I imagine that Andrew and Katrina have been taking sort of notes on the nature of feedback, and I expect that we'll probably get some sort of like consolidated opinion on the issues that have been raised, and we can use that sort of alongside the results of these straw polls to inform the second draft. And then I guess we can probably share the opinions back to council, and perhaps there's like comments to the next draft. I don't know, Andrew, if that works for you.
Yeah, we've certainly been taking notes of all of the questions that have been raised. If there are further questions, Ben, if you want to send those through, and then we can provide, as you say, sort of consolidated feedback on the various comments that have been raised, the various options that we've been asked to consider, and then we'll look for your instructions in terms of producing a further draft of the bylaws.
Same thing would go for Michael and I, Ben, if there were comments directed to us.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you to everyone. Next, we have Representative Akina. Go ahead.
whole before like after this, when we move into the rest of the agenda, may I request for council to have a like 5 to 10 minute a break for washroom and other things, since we've been at this for almost 2 hours.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you, Representative Aquino. Okay, this is again the last call for any questions about the governance review to happen. I will give everyone 3 seconds to raise their hand. Going once, going twice, perfect. Thank you to our lawyers and our consultants for being here on a Sunday morning and sitting here for 2 hours and helping us answer our questions. And hopefully we had a productive chat, and we look forward to your recommendations at our next council meeting. But you're free to go and enjoy your Sunday now.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks all.
Bye, folks. Okay, I'm just gonna move us out of the committee as a whole, and I am gonna use my speaker's prerogative to say we are taking a 10-minute break and we'll be returning at 12:35 p.m. Perfect. And people enjoy the break. Let's just be back on time.